Hold up. What do I need to do? That's not going to work. All right, whatever. We're going to just figure it out. Hello, everybody. Stay. All right. I'm going to move my chair a little closer. Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. It's Wednesday, 6 o'clock. We're back for after hours. I have the tiniest glass of wine because we're fancy today. Hello, hello, hello. Really getting my sips in now before I speak just relentlessly for 30 minutes and I don't take another sip at all. And I wait for some people to join. All right, hello. I am in a new space. I moved. So this is my new live chair. Well, it's the same chair, different space. So that is a little bit of foreshadowing for our conversation. We have talked about moving with plants in live before. However, I literally just moved with all of my plants. So I am going to write a blog post about it. We're going to do a little video. It's going to be really fun. So check that out. It's coming up on the horizon, probably in the next week or so. So without further ado, because we do have a lot of questions to get through today, I'm going to go through some of the questions that were submitted. And like always, if you have any questions and you want to just drop them into the chat, please do. I'll answer them. All right. Which one do I want to start with? Let's start with this one. I love this feature. Okay. Tiny brown spots on juvenile monstera leaves. Why? I don't think the roots are rotting. So if I had to guess, I would assume these are almost like pinpricks, like little pinprick brown spots. And that could be like a lot of reasons. Honestly, I had that on one of my philodendrons on all of the new leaves that were coming out. At first, I thought it was maybe because I was misting in too direct of sun and it was getting sunburned. I also thought it might be a pest, but it ended up not being a pest. And finally, I figured out that it was the water quality. It was actually like minerals and salts being deposited on the new leaves because they are very tender. And those new leaves are going to give you the most accurate, up-to-date information on what is happening in real time. So, for example, a lot of people will get brown spots or brown tips on the oldest leaf. I'm looking at my plants to see if I can pick one out really easily to show you like what is like an old leaf. But I actually just went through and pruned everything like 2 days ago. So I don't really have a good example handy. But basically, the oldest leaf on your plant has been there the longest time. But it is going to be giving you information from when that plant was the newest leaf on your plant. So anything that's like funky happening on there is not really super accurate information. That could be weeks or months old. If it is like a brown spot that is newly developed on the oldest leaf, it's probably just aging, or it might be because of something in the environment, but it's still not really something to put a lot of emphasis on, just because that leaf is always going to die. Even if it kind of starts looking crappy or might be indicative of overwatering, underwatering, a pest, whatever, it's kind of like a sacrificial leaf because it's going to die no matter what, whether the plant is 100% perfect, healthy, whatever, or it has an issue. So for sure, see what's going on your plant, do some investigation, ask those questions. It's good questions to ask and kind of have like a repertoire about like inspecting things and receiving information from the plant. But like, if it's the oldest leaf, you can kind of just be like, okay. And as long as the newest leaf on your plant looks okay, it's not really anything you have to worry about. Now, if you have brown spots on the oldest leaf and the newest leaf, then you could say, okay, something weird's going on here. Let me check the soil, let me check the light, let me check for pests. You kind of go all the way down the list. Always making sure to only change one thing at a time. That way you can kind of really dial in on what the problem might be. Because if you think it's a pest, or you think it's light, or you think it's water, and you change all three of those things just like interchangeably over a very short period of time, it can just end up doing more harm than good. And then you don't really know what the problem is because you didn't really resolve the initial problem, and you may have created more problems. So that's really what we see a lot with like beginners in plant care is they like panic, and probably one like really small thing went wrong, and they just like started doing a million other things, and they probably could have just left the plant alone and it would have like resolved itself, because 99% of the time it's just acclimation stress, because plants need time to adjust from environment to environment. And then you kind of snowball into a worse situation. So I would say it might be something as asinine as just mineral deposits on your plant, which if you live in DC, it's going to happen. The water here is just, it's kind of hard. So use filtered water. Just keep an eye on it. Sometimes those little brown spots can be spider mites, but inspect your plant, make sure it's not that. And if so, it might just be something kind of funky like that. But we did get a question in the chat. Okay, so we got a question in the chat. I'm going to get rid of this question. Hold on. That says, what do you recommend for orchids to promote flowering? I've heard differing things on water. A shot of water once a week, soaking once a week, etc. Mine didn't flower this year. Well, I'm glad that you've had it for more than a year and it's at least flowered for you and it's still alive. I am not an orchid expert by any means, but there are a few things that I know people do wrong that can actually inhibit the flowering or just like the progression, like growth of the plant, that are kind of like old wives' tales. So like one of those things is like, put an ice cube on your orchid. And the intention with that piece of advice is good. It is pure. I don't think any kind of like advice that's out there on the internet has like malintent, like, oh, I'm going to troll people with this bad houseplant advice. It usually has good intentions. It's just not, it's kind of like half baked. So for example, adding the ice cube to your orchid, the thought there is that it is going to release a small amount of water consistently over a long period of time, because orchids like it to be really humid. So where I think this like myth comes from is either Florida or California, where a majority of houseplants are grown, and that both happen to be incredibly hot, sunny, all the time environments. So if you leave an ice cube out in Florida, anywhere, it's going to melt in less than a minute. Like it's going to be just gone and warm and like no problem. Same thing with the majority of California, especially where they're growing plants, which is Southern California. If you do that in a place, even like DC, where we have a lot of, obviously they have air conditioning in Florida, but it's a lot more of like a temperate climate, or, I'm from New York. So if you do that in New York, sometimes of the year, that ice cube might be there like next week. Especially if you have like a sunroom with a drafty window, like these orchids are already acclimating to an environment that is wildly different from their natural environment. So we're usually having to supplement humidity. So if you are supplementing heat and humidity into your home for an orchid, and they've managed to adapt to the necessarily lower levels of heat and humidity. Adding an ice cube is actually really harmful to the plant because it's not going to melt like that. Our homes tend to stay very consistently humid and consistently heated. So, we all put our thermostats at like 72, and if you have forced air in any way, the humidity in your house is going to be probably below 40%. So that ice cube is going to sit on the orchid's roots long enough to actually cause cold damage, which is silly. So don't do that. The shot of water is probably correct. I find that all of this tends to honestly just be like really confusing. And typically, like, you are also having to deal with the orchid being in a pot that has no hole or in a plastic cup. So I always like to tell people, because again, I'm not an orchid expert, but like, don't do the ice cube thing. Try to put it somewhere where it's going to stay warm and humid, like a bathroom with a window or a kitchen is great. And then it wants to stay evenly moist in sphagnum moss or some sort of orchid bark mix. It does not want to sit in water. It does not want to be wet all the time like a fern. They're actually, so they're epiphytes. So they grow in like the crooks of trees in the wild. So it's not that they necessarily need to like constantly have water, because almost every time when someone brings an orchid into the shop that they're like, I think something's wrong with it, it's always overwatered. It's almost never that someone underwatered an orchid. But if you kind of allow them to dry out just a little bit between those waterings, as long as they're getting adequate humidity, you're going to notice those roots just stay really, really beautiful and green and white. And they're storing water for the plant, and the leaves stay really nice and succulent. And then the plant can focus on flowering. So how do you get it to flower? Once you've put it in a good environment, you've got the light right, you've got the water right, you've got the humidity right. That's basic needs, bottom of the pyramid. Then to flower, typically a lot of plants need a little bit of stress to flower. So they need to like be in a pot for a while. They need to be a little bit root bound. That's a kind of like general rule. So get it in a good environment and let it be there for a while. So it could be a year, especially if you repotted it, that can kind of set the clock back. And then if that's happened and you're like, I have a happy orchid, it's bloomed for me before, it's been in the same pot, I know I'm like watering it right, like, it's good. Everything is good. Why isn't it flowering? It might need nutrient. So the last little tippy top of the pyramid, once you have everything else filled up, is fertilizer. So we do have a video on a breakdown of fertilizing your houseplants. We speak very briefly on orchids because, again, disclaimer, I'm not an orchid expert, but there is orchid-specific fertilizing formulas. I will say that if you do have an orchid that you want to fertilize, make sure that you dilute the fertilizer properly according to the instructions on the bottle, or if it's crystals or whatever, just follow the instructions to a T, and even like over dilute, because you can always add more, but you can't take away. And if it is in a pot that does have no hole or drainage of any kind, you might want to like poke some holes in it or drill a hole, just because if you start fertilizing a plant and there is nowhere for that water to flush out, the fertilizer can build up and it can burn the roots and just not be great long term. That's something that you could run into, where suddenly it flowers and then you're like, fertilize, and then stuff starts going downhill pretty fast because there's too much nutrient in the soil. Can also affect pests. Sometimes if there's too much nutrient in the soil, other things move in. I hope that helps with your orchid. I do love orchids. I wish I was better at them, but I'm just not yet. All right, let's take another question. Okay. Someone submitted my Stramanthe Triostar and Calathea vittata. I didn't realize that. I've never said it out loud. I always read it. Are in bright and direct light, but very limp. Thoughts? Did you repot it recently? how moist do you keep the soil? And how far away from the window is your plant? If they are in bright indirect light to us, it still could be not bright enough for them. And then the way where that breaks down is in connection with water, because there's always the relationship between light and water for the plants. So it could even be great light, but maybe you're watering it a little too much and it's, it's bright indirect. So think of it in terms of energy, like direct sun, like 4 to 6 hours of like direct sun, like the sun's just blasting in your house all afternoon. Like those plants are like, so much energy. Yes. And so plants that are used to that are cacti and succulents. They're just like, give it to me. Yes. And then, you have plants like snake plants where they are used to being in very low light situations and they're just kind of chilling. They're just chugging along. They're like, yep, that's all I need. That's all I need. A little bit, just a little bit. What am I trying to say? Snake plants like are the people who have like one shot of espresso and they're like, that's all I need. Like, I'm like ready to go. And then cacti and succulents are people who like drink 3 cups of coffee every day and take pre-workout. And, like they're just like, I need this to like go. So if you try to give a snake plant, a pre-workout milkshake, they're going to have a bad time. And equally, if you're expending all this energy and you're not getting adequate water, like hydration or nutrient, you're going to burn out pretty quickly. So that's why they're always in a relationship. We have to maintain like this balance, because each plant has specific needs and there's ways to kind of like navigate those needs a little bit. So you can be like a little bit out of balance in some things, but that always means that you need to make up for it in other ways. So if you're putting a plant in bright indirect light, that's totally fine. Even if it's like slightly less light than it actually really would like. But you have to adjust your watering. So if you're noticing you're like, I feel like this light is good, but it's not getting rid of the water in the soil fast enough. Even though to us, it's bright indirect light, the plant is trying to tell you, listen, like this is just not enough energy for me. So I need a little bit more time between waterings, or, that's one way to balance out the equation, or I need more sun. So you kind of are always like figuring out the balance there. So that could be one thing. Try adjusting, either the water or the light in one direction or another, but just do one at a time. So either move it closer to a window, but, don't keep watering it like crazy. Wait for it to dry out a little bit to kind of tell you what its cycle is, or, really pull back on the watering in that kind of darker spot or where it originally is. It could also be from repotting, because when we repot, sometimes we have to break some roots. It's just like part of the growth. Calatheas are pretty dramatic. Stramanthes are like related to it. So sometimes they kind of just pout for a little bit after they get repotted until they've had an opportunity to like recover. And, they might be a little limp because we might have pulled out some of the support from underneath them. So once they're able to kind of like get acclimated, get some new roots put out underneath them, it helps them kind of like stand up straight and kind of go from there. But it's not at all surprising that if you repotted it or even just got it recently, that they like to pout a little bit. So just give them their little period of drama, and then hopefully that helps. Right. Let's see. So another Calathea question. My Calathea rattlesnake stopped unfolding during the day. It used to. Any ideas? This is odd. So if you know Calatheas or, Calatheas, Marantas, a lot of other plants have a sort of circadian rhythm. So they kind of are like little solar panels. So like at night, they'll fold up and this helps them conserve like humidity and kind of protect themselves. And then during the day, they fold out. And that helps them be like solar panels and kind of absorb as much sun as possible and fan out. So if you haven't moved your plant, nothing has really changed. You haven't disrupted it in any way. You haven't repotted it. You didn't start fertilizing it. You didn't move it. You didn't put an air conditioner in front of it, what have you. If nothing has changed and it just randomly started doing that, that's weird. I honestly don't really know. There might be some other kind of stressor. If everything has stayed the same and you've had the plant for like a long time, like in the same pot, or if it's in a pot without a hole, I would say maybe it's like a little bit root bound and it needs to be repotted just to kind of shock it back to life, give it some space. Maybe it's a little stressed out. The only other thing I could think of is if it's getting, like it's summertime now. So like if that spot that it's in gets like a significantly greater amount of light than it did when you got it, like during the winter or even just during the wintertime in general, it might be like, it's too much sun. Because again, calatheas are very much like Goldilocks. They want not too bright, not too dark, et cetera, et cetera. If it's in a pot without a hole too, like I was mentioning originally with the Monstera, if it's been in that pot for a while and you've been watering it in the pot without a hole or even fertilizing it, the stress could also be within the pot, that it's like, there's a buildup basically. So if there's every time you water your plant, why we tell you to water until water runs out of the bottom is A, all the soil is thoroughly saturated, and B, it's just the easiest. But the third reason, C, is that is helping every single time to flush out the soil. So if you over fertilize, if you under fertilize, if there's a pest, if you have to treat something, if you have hard water, whatever, if you are always watering until water runs out of the bottom of the pot, each time you are like flushing the soil out. So there still might be trace amounts, but you're kind of starting from square one every single time. If you don't have a pot with a hole, things can accumulate. So there can become pockets of minerals, salts, fertilizers, whatever. And there's nowhere for those to go. So eventually, if it stays in the pot long enough or the pot is small enough proportionately, it can actually make the soil like basically toxic and cause issues. So if you've had a plant in a pot for a long time and all of a sudden it's starting to have issues like this, I would pull it out of the pot and just kind of check out the roots and make sure nothing's funky. And if possible, if it's not like super disruptive, just, kind of give the plant a refresh and see if that helps. But yeah, I don't really know. I'd have to know a little bit more information, but I hope that helps. All right, let's do another question. Okay, my black velvet looks like it's poking out 3 new leaf buds, but I haven't seen progress in 2 weeks. Again, it would be something where I'm like, when did you buy the plant? Because if it's new, the thing that'll stunt new growth is change. So if you just got the plant and you were like, ooh, there's 3 new leaves coming in, and you brought it home and you changed its whole environment, right? Like did you repot it? Did you move it? What have you? If you change something, the plant's going to be like, whoa. Do I want to expend this energy? Like, I gotta like adjust. I gotta reassess. I don't know if it's worth it to expend all this energy and like putting out these new leaves. Cause like, I don't know what's happening right now. I need to like preserve myself. So once it figures out like, oh, I'm okay. Like I'm acclimated, whatever, it'll put out those leaves. The leaves also, this is why sometimes the first leaves after you bring a plant home are like kind of funky. They might be like stunted or wrinkled or whatever, because the plant is acclimating. It literally had to like take a pause, reassess, and then it was like, okay, I can move on. So again, if it's any change, even if you've had the plant for a long time, it could be that it's been super hot. We just passed like the longest part of the days being the longest part of the summer. Now we're moving back towards the fall equinox where the days are equal hours of day and night. The plants know. The plants are pretty attuned into that. That's what rules their entire lives is the sun. So they can kind of sense when things are changing. So like if your plant is now significantly getting more heat, sun, etc., but you've just been like, I water once a week and that's it, and you don't really check in on the soil, the plant could be stressed because they're getting a lot of energy from the sun. It's very hot. It's very humid. Our homes are not vacuums. Even if we have the AC on, it's humid and it's warm in those windowsills, especially. So just always be checking in on your plants. Like my plants, since I moved, I'm watering a lot of them like a couple times a week, just between them being really stressed from the move, the heat, the humidity. They're getting a ton more light in the space that I'm in now. So, be open to things kind of adjusting and changing throughout the year, just like us. We should be drinking a lot of water all the time. But we definitely need a lot more water when it's hotter out, or when we're working harder, exercising outside, anything like that. So be open to it needing something else if it strays away from its kind of typical behavior, because it's only really typical for a very short period of time. It's always going to change. And then in the winter, it'll be the opposite. They kind of want you to like leave them alone because they're asleep. But yeah. Hope that helps. And just be patient. All right. This person asks, ideal spot for philodendron micans, leaves curled. If the leaves are curled and you feel like the soil is sufficiently moist, and micans, again, does not need to be consistently moist. I don't find personally that they have like a very specific moisture or humidity requirement. I was actually really surprised when I brought home a micans for how easy the care is and how adaptable they are. So if the leaves are curling, maybe you need to water it a little bit more. As per kind of the theme here, we're like, it was just really hot. And we are in high summer. So like the days are very long. There's a lot of hours of daylight. It's been raining like a little bit, but we haven't had a ton of like super overcast days. It's been pretty dry summer up until recently, right? So that still affects our indoor plants. So they're using a lot of energy. Maybe you just need to check in a little bit more and water it a little bit. If it's always, again, if the water is good and it's always kind of been a little bit curled, it's probably too much sun. It's like too much. It's like curling away, and no amount of water is like really going to help it because it's not really what the problem is. Something can have damp roots, but still be curling in dryness from like a heat stress, or even just, it's just too much sun. It's not adapted to be able to receive that much sun. So I would move it, start with like a foot away. I wouldn't like put it somewhere drastically far away initially. But I've also been very surprised with how adaptable micans can be to like a lower light environment. So be open to that as well. But just kind of start foot by foot, making sure that you're also keeping up with the watering and checking in with the soil. And then, yeah, hopefully all the new growth comes in a little bit better. That's what I would guess. All right, one more question. Oh, I have two. Maybe I can just fit them in. Okay. Holes, brown spots, and translucent spots on Calathea ornata can spider mites cause? Not really. Honestly, like holes, brown spots, and translucent spots, to me, sound like it could be root rot. And if you feel like it's definitely not root rot, it could have been a slug. Um, so I have noticed, like if you just got a plant and it's like from the greenhouse, they're actually like remarkably hard to find on the plant. They're like really good at getting into like really bizarre positions on like the undersides of leaves where you're like, I feel like I looked at this plant 100 times. How would I miss a slug? And then there they are. So if it's a relatively new plant, if it's not repotted, you got this Calathea ornata, it looked great at the plant shop, you brought it home in its plastic pot, and now it's kind of starting to have all this like weird stuff on it. It could be residual damage from a slug. I would check it again, just to make sure. And if you're sure there's no slug, there's nothing nibbling away at it, nothing slimy nibbling away at it, then it could be root rot. And, this is pretty typical for Calatheas because they are super difficult. They're not easy. They very much are Goldilocks plants. And it's not always, we've talked about this a few times. It's not always that it just needs more water. Like it wants you to just keep watering it. It really does need a certain level of humidity. And I think sometimes the inclination is to just keep watering it in order to keep up that humidity or keep it happy. And it just rots away, which is really frustrating because you're like, what do I do? But I would highly recommend that if you are just getting into plants, maybe skip the Calatheas, go for a Maranta, a prayer plant. If you want something that has like that cool look and does the motion and everything else, or even a Strammanthia is a little bit easier. But Calatheas will break your heart every time. So you've been warned. But what I would seriously recommend as well is if you do want to get a Calathea, really think about the humidity. So if you are able to provide an environment like a bathroom or a kitchen with a window where it is high humidity, if you can group it with like several other plants so they can share humidity, I find that is really, really helpful. Or if you are like ready to commit to a humidifier life. Seriously, that is what I have found a Calathea like really wants. Misting, not really going to get you there. Sometimes a pebble tray. If you live in a basement, honestly, you're like a step ahead because basements are very humid. So you're almost there. But yeah, there's a lot of afflictions. I will answer questions about Calatheas until the end of time, but I'm also not a Calathea expert. I don't know how to I don't know any tips and tricks about how to keep them because I don't keep them in my house. They're too much drama for me. Very pretty though. All right, one last question. We're a little over time, but it's fine. I just want to finish this one question. Okay. Prince of Orange, which is I love this. It's abbreviated capital P, lowercase o, capital O. No context. I just knew what that was. I knew exactly what it was, which I don't know. I've never actually seen it abbreviated like that, but I'm just really glad that we're creating a shorthand here, a language that we speak amongst ourselves. It says, Prince of Orange has brown spots on leaves and leaf tips brown in my kitchen window, overwatered. Okay, yeah, this is pretty easy. We tend to think that like any brown spots or brown tips is like trying to say something. If it's the older leaves, it's probably nothing. I would say your kitchen window, I don't know what direction your kitchen faces. So if it faces like south or west, it could be too much light. I find that the Prince of Orange likes a nice east facing window. A couple hours of direct sun is okay, but like it doesn't want to be blasted all the time. Definitely wants to have an opportunity to dry out, maybe like the top 2 to 3 inches of soil, and then water it again. Like not fully dry, like bone dry between waterings, but a little bit more than you would think. They're not super water sensitive, most philodendrons. And then I do also find that Prince of Orange specifically are pretty sensitive. Right when you bring them home, they can be very sensitive. Anything that has that like lighter leaf color is like pretty sensitive because they don't have a lot of chlorophyll. Like any of those funky colors, usually the plant is always going to fade to green. So in those moments, they're very susceptible to some ailments. This is what happens with people who get variegated plants or stromanthes, where the white part is just always going to turn brown because there's no chlorophyll in it. So it's like it's really susceptible to like looking really icky. So you kind of just have to really like and honor the beautiful new leaf as it unfurls and is this like very novel color, and then just kind of like accept whatever like happens to it until it turns green and you just can't notice any of those spots anymore. But sometimes you can get it to where it acclimates to your space enough and becomes mature enough where that lessens a lot. But if you have a small plant, if you just got it, if you just repotted it, it's probably going to have some bumps and bruises until it fully acclimates and becomes a little bit more mature. I wouldn't put too much pressure on it. Again, like if you, if you really feel like you're intaking a lot of information from your plant that it's saying like something is very wrong here, investigate that. Like if it's very crispy, if it's curling, if it's wrinkling, it has brown tips, it has brown spots, yes, like it's probably underwatering. Typically overwatering is not going to present as crispy brown tips. It's going to be mushy, it's going to be yellowing, the plant's just going to kind of like start dropping leaves randomly. Because it's very stressed out and its roots are like basically rotting from underneath it. So sometimes if it's very severe overwatering and the plant has no more roots, yeah, it can have brown tips. But I would say it just sounds like your plant is acclimating, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Boop. That's all the questions. We're a little bit over. I gotta go. But I'm so very glad to be back. I took a brief hiatus, vacation. So, thanks for bearing with us for that week. And then thank you to Lily for stepping in and running the live last week. It's fun to get other people on here as well. And we'll do a little bit more of that in the future. But yeah, until then, have a great rest of your Wednesday, great rest of your week. And I will see you next time. Bye. Bye, YouTube.